Hello, we're Global App Testing, and this is Building Globally, Lessons in Enterprise Product Growth. This is the fastest growing, most exciting podcast in product, and we will be looking at every single angle on how you can grow your enterprise product by talking to professionals in some extremely exciting businesses. On with the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Building Globally, Lessons in Enterprise Product Growth, brought to you by Global App Testing. I'm your host, Adam, and today we're diving deep into the question of product teams at different stages of company life. What kind of product team is appropriate for what kind of business? How do you build a growth-ready product team? Today, I'm very lucky to be joined by Daniel Lereya. Daniel joined Monday.com as the VP of R&D in 2016, and now he is the Chief Product and Technology Officer. To refresh everybody on the timeline, that means that Daniel will have joined Monday.com when the company was 4 years old and had just led a 7.6 million Series A funding round. And by 2019, a few years later, it raised 150 million Series D, so in a period of massive growth before the company went public in 2021. Daniel, first of all, welcome. Could you give us a little bit of a sketch of the Monday.com now versus the Monday.com when you joined? How do you think what were the differences in the way that the business and the product team were constructed, and maybe how does it feel different?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Maybe try to visualize it together with me, but back then when I started at Monday, back then it was The Pulse. It was a different company name. If you would come into our office, I think that what you probably see is a very small office. Everyone are sitting together. You can actually touch everyone, with your hands. So everyone's sitting closely together, and all the room is filled with, screens with our KPIs on top of the screen. We had one company dashboard with the number of paying accounts. This is what we actually lived upon. So we felt good when this number goes up, and we felt less good when it didn't. And also, one very strong memory that I have is that we had sounds for every meaningful event. So every new sign up back then, every new upgrade, every new channel referral, and so on and so forth. There was a vibe that you are living the product and the business and the customers. And so very exciting. And, a very small team. When I joined, it was around 40 employees at the company. Everyone's super excited about, crashing it together. So very exciting time. And back then we didn't have a product management function yet. So with that, we are a product company. So, it's quite of a dissonance, but I think that it's actually not. And what we had is that everyone were having a product mindset in mind. So what are we trying to solve? What success looks like, and so on. So all of this was the seeds of how we are built today.
What does the product team look like now versus then?
In terms of the product team itself, so as I mentioned, back then we didn't have any product management, and we started building it up. And quite a short time after I joined, we hired the first product manager, but she was working at the beginning on one specific project on the side. So everyone were working, and she was there to crack things, to crack a very specific challenge. Today, we are a huge team at the product. So today, the product management team is around 80 people with a lot of different functions, product managers, product analysts, a lot of operations as well. So it's a totally different world, I would say.
Yeah, sounds really different. Yeah, and over the course of this sort of 30 minutes, I'm really curious to get a sense for people who are in fast moving startups. At what stage is what kind of product team appropriate, right? Because there's a lot of different permutations, I guess you must have had between literally not having a product team and then having a product team that is larger, I guess, than the total headcount of the company when you joined, with specifically specialized roles and different functions. So perhaps you could give us a couple of checkpoints that drove you to expand the product team. Why, do you mind me asking, that first hire, why was she hired then? So she was in charge of a specific thing. Presumably you were also at that point, I mean, you were making product decisions. So then I guess there was the CEO and salespeople making decisions of where you should allocate resources to build the product, and the engineers and designers doing the building, right? Why was that first product title introduced?
First of all, I think like the mentality in Monday is that we are a very product-led company, meaning that even before we had product, like because we are building a very diverse platform for so many different types of customers and industries, and basically have a lot of different audiences that we are aiming for. So in a way, I think that the power was always in the hands of like the ones who are building the product. So back then, before we had product management, I think that the most of the decisions were taken actually by Roy and Eran, the founders, myself, and other people within the development team back then and the product design. And I think that specifically for the first product manager, it wasn't a decision of let's build product management. Actually, she was a friend of one of the main people that we had in the team back then. She was super talented. We met her. We heard what she's doing and we said, okay, we got to have her with us. And once she joined, suddenly we started to understand really the value of product management. So I think this was an important point for us. But also afterwards, it took us time until product became a function, meaning that it was an integral part of every other team. Back then, there was point in time that we met someone named Gil. He's the founder of Face.com and afterwards worked in Facebook for a few years and then came back to Israel to bring the message of product management, I would say. And we met with him and he said, listen, you got to adopt these methodologies and how things work there. At the beginning, we were reluctant. We say, listen, we know what we are doing. We get the right decisions. We look at data. We do everything right and we are succeeding. But after listening more carefully, we saw that there is an opportunity. And I think this was a pivotal point for us, from which one we started building the product as an organization.
It sounds like in both of those cases, they're kind of outside forces, right? It's not like you from inside go, we need to build a product management function. Basically, you talk to people outwards and they come in and they influence the company, sometimes in spite of believing that you might already know better.
Yeah, I think so.
So besides those two moments then, as you started to get a little larger, were there any other specific moments where you felt like it was a real checkpoint in the product team, when there was something that might have either forced you or caused you to evolve and evolve the maturity of the product team?
I think another very meaningful event was the setup of our first growth team. So at this point, we were building a lot of new features and a lot of new value to the product. And when we started working on like setting up the product management team and so on, we got introduced to the concept of growth, meaning take the existing value that you already have, make it more accessible, like bring it to the local maximum instead of building new value. And we actually decided this sounds really interesting. Also, the connection to the business and the fact that you try with product to affect business KPIs directly, like conversion to paying and things like that. And we set up the first growth team. The one who led it, her name is Michal, and she later on, like few years later, became our VP of growth in product. So she was an amazing product manager. And I think that our experience with growth of starting to experiment and starting to do things differently, not only building new value, but working with these methodologies in order to optimize the value that we already have and seeing the effect was a very meaningful point, because we say, wow, there is a huge power in doing it with these methodologies and in this way of thinking. So I think this was also a very important point, that we saw value. And in essence, I think that the most important point is to create points in which you get value, and then it creates the appetite going forward.
The way you're describing it, it makes it sound almost like it is it's based in hiring, right? Like you hire in fantastic talent, or you build a team, and then on the back of that, the function evolves or the function adds maturity or new kind of strategies are obvious to you. I have two kind of questions for that. One, I guess, what was the role of round of funding in that? Was it that the funding comes in and then you kind of create a load of new teams and that's the sort of the cycle of evolution of the business? And then the second question is, how do you, in this kind of jumble where you've got a lot happening, really fast growth, new people being hired all the time, how do you ensure that there's actually coherence in the product and in the kind of mission? How do you make sure that the team doesn't sort of grow itself into dysfunction and random behavior, and make sure that all of the work is productive and channeled effectively?
Yeah. So first, as for funding rounds, so I think that for us it wasn't the main motivator for bringing like more product people. I think that the main thing was when we saw value, and I think that we really believe that once you introduce a new function, and many times when you build something, you build a company, many times you recruit for roles that you don't have. So I think the most important part is like bringing at the beginning people that you really feel that can take you forward and can take the company forward. And then with this value, this was the motivation. We got the motivation from seeing value and then, bringing more like them. So it's not necessarily deeply tied to the fundraising, I would say. And, I think in general for product management, the best advice in my eyes is, build it in scarcity at the beginning, then really makes the value super concentrated, meaning that, we really wanted that once we bring more people, not create a place where we have less of a quality of people, and also not making the organization less, I would say, less data driven or less impact based or things like that, because there is their function. So one of the main principles that we have is that first, when we introduce new functions, we keep it scarce. This scarcity actually creates appreciation by everyone around. It creates a set of expectations and it creates hunger. Like the best and like the teams that are most passionate about bringing product back then was the teams that didn't have a product, saw a product on other teams, saw the impact, understood it. And second, when you build with scarcity, the rest of the organization don't lose this ability. So we have a very, funny story about the first time we brought a content manager. Suddenly, no one knows how to write things in English. So we didn't want to create that with product as well. And this is I think the best tip is to build it gradually and put a lot of emphasis on quality of people and making sure that the first few people are the right seed, because they are the seed for the profession going forward.
I love the point about hiring a content manager and no one remembers how to speak English. I wonder whether there were any other sort of pains or difficulties around the fact that people's remits are going to specialize, right? If you're in a team of 3, then you've kind of got to do everything. And then suddenly when you're in a team of 40, everybody has a really narrow niche and there's a lot of change there. What were the difficulties around that? Do you have any stories of how you managed that people could learn from?
First, I think people should have, an end-to-end missions that are like complete. And when you have that, even if you have like a lot of people, they have a lot of missions instead of taking one mission and split it into many different parts. So this really helps making sure that like people are accountable for the end result, are looking outside towards the customers and the impact and real world missions, and not things that are like, artificial based on the organizational structure. Second, we really believe in scale with quality and not with quantity. So I think that even today, in respect to the company size, the tech organization together with the product is pretty lean. And this is because we really believe that in such professions, you have the 10x effect, meaning that you have actually specific people that can do 10x or even think differently about things. So we put a lot of emphasis on not building an army, not building an industry line, rather like really handcrafting the organization, bringing the right people, bringing people with very high talent and giving them a lot of ownership and accountability. And I think that for us, this really helped to preserve the fact that everyone still, as the organizational grow, still looking at our customers around mission, which is a real world mission, end to end, even as the organization scales. And I do feel that today, we have so many different specialties within the product team. So we have people in product that are around growth, people in the product that are around the platform, data, and so many others. But we try to keep the same principles and make sure that with that, people have ownership over things that they can actually measure and get feedback from the real world as much as we can. And I think this is a very important point. And of course, we have a lot of challenges around it, but I think that it's very, very important to have these kind of end-to-end missions and also to have people that are extremely talented and strong and give them the power.
One of the other challenges with growing as rapidly as Monday did is the difficulty with projecting figures with no, there's an argument that you should sort of build the team for the business as it's going to be in 3 months' time, where you might have double the revenue than you had 5 months ago, right? I wonder whether you could talk at all about how the planning, how anything around sort of projected figures, understanding what Monday's future was, how did that impact the way that you hired and grew the product team?
I must say that we don't look at it this way. And I think that Monday is a hyper growth company. If I comparing the time frame that you mentioned over the last 8 years, we have more than 200 multiple of the revenue and more than 50x of the team size, I would say, which is super high growth. But I think that when we think about the team building, first of all, again, I think that we tend to do things late in terms of get to the situation where you need this person, when you really understand the need, and then only hire. A drill that I love to do and I recommend others to do is that many times, we practically every year we feel that the company is different, the organization is different, the product team is different. So many times what we do is periodically we look at companies that are one step or two steps above us. We actually meet them, talk with them about their structure, about the different functions, about how they work, and try to understand if there are things that we can learn from and should prepare in advance. I do feel that in the early stages, it really helps to open your mind and not only continue with the trajectory you are currently at in building the organization, and also to introduce new functions. But again, when we are doing it, it's when we need it with scarcity, and scale what works and scale when there is an actual need and you see the value.
You became Chief Product and Technology Officer, was it the year before last year?
I think a year and a half ago, something like that.
A year and a half ago. So could you talk a little bit about the circumstances, what was happening before they created that role, or before with your predecessor, and then what have you done with the role? What changes have you wanted to make to the product team? What has been your kind of agenda in terms of trying to improve it?
Yeah, so it's a question that I know many people are asking, whether it's a good idea to have one person to do both, or should split it. And I think it really depends. It really depends on the company. It really depends also on the circumstances, as you said. Throughout the growth of the company, there was a time when we hired a VP product. Unfortunately, after a few months, it didn't work out. The fact that I took both the product and the engineering was circumstances. But also I feel that in many ways, something that is special about Monday is that we constantly think about challenges in a very holistic way. And I think this is also how we build the teams. So if you think about how teams are looking in Monday, the roles are super important in order for everyone to bring their own specific X factor, but success and what people are aiming at is shared and it's aligned. And I think this creates a very unique dynamics between the disciplines. So in a way, also the fact that I'm looking at things holistically, I think that it gave us a lot of value. And on top of that, I think that, the Monday platform and our offerings, it's very hard to draw the line between the tech and the product. And when you have both considerations in hand, you get to an optimal decision making in a way. So I think that for us, it was something that was very intuitive to do. With that, I do feel that there are disadvantages. I think that, it's a constant fight for attention, and like you do want to have both perspectives, not only working together, but as an independent perspectives. And specifically, we try to build around it. So we really now decided that, for instance, on the VP level, we are going to have professional VPs. So VP of engineering is managing the engineering, VP of product are managing the product, and so on. So we try to have best of all worlds. So in one way, to have an holistic way of looking at things, one way of looking at success, it creates a different dynamics within the organization. You don't see, forcing hands or things like that. Rather, everyone are working together, and with that, still having a very deep professional management and leadership in order to make sure that we are not losing because of attention or because of lack of depth. And I really believe that now we got to a place where we are getting the advantages of both worlds. But I think that in many cases, it's also a matter of circumstances and like relationships between different people with the company's management and the founders and so on. So it's complicated, I would say. There is no one answer in my eyes.
The product stuff, was it originally done by the founders and then sort of slowly let go out of their hands? Or was it something that they felt that they were unable to do and they needed to hire somebody in? I wonder if you could talk about that kind of process of the professionalization of the product vision at Monday.
I think that from the get-go, we always say, even though we didn't have a product management function, we said we are a product company, and we believe that product, it's a way of looking at the world, looking at problems. Product is, in our eyes, it's an approach, in many ways. So I think that from the beginning, like we did everything around the product. Eran and Roy, the founders, did it. I did it. Additional people did it as well. So we did it together. And I think that as you scale, there is a lot of professional depth that you want to bring into this situation. But the essence remains the same. It's about how you look at problems. It's about how you look at opportunities. And I think from even before we had, the product management function, so developers would run A/B tests and look on the results and see what works and what not. We had a lot of work of constantly talking with our customers and interviewing them and understanding what the problems are. So we did a lot of this, but I think that as you scale, you need it, first of all, in a lot more depth and also in a very methodical way. So I wouldn't say that there was point in time when we started doing product. I think we are product by heart. This is what we love to do. Every one of us, building products that people use that helps them to get to their goals. So in a way, I think it was for me, it was like a very smooth transformation and not like a single point in time where things were changed.
I'd love to ask just a couple of general questions about advice for product managers in startups that hopefully are lucky to be in as good a position as Monday.com. What do you think are the most important things to get right? If you were talking to yourself a few years ago, what would you say? These are the things that are the most important when building a product function in a startup.
Yeah, so first I would start from the people, and we talked about it. You need the first few people that you bring to the team to be the ones that you want others to be the same. And you should be very, very strict about that. So this is the first thing. I think that the second thing, in my eyes, we invested a lot at the beginning in being able to measure things and being able to do A/B tests and so on. So we have, it's quite an interesting story, but we have an internal system called BigBrain. BigBrain is like a system that we built when we were super small, and all the experimentations and all the events tracking and all the things are there. And I think that when you set up a new product function, or when you start, building your product, putting the ability to measure everything and to see the data is super important. And I think maybe the third thing I would do is building the connection to the customers. So building all the things that help you get the voice of the customer in a very direct way. So we put a lot of emphasis on that from the beginning. I told you about the screens and the dashboards and like being connected to the customers in all different kind of ways. So I think that these are the main things I would do at the beginning when establishing a product organization, and that would set up it for success.
When a startup has just received investment, and in that moment they're not making any money, but they've got this money to sort of spend on people and on growth, how do you answer the kind of question of how many people should I hire? How big should my product team be? I think that among a lot of middle management at startup I've seen, there's an impulse to overhire sometimes. So how do you sort of figure that out and identify when spending is prudent versus when you should hold back in a context where the company is ultimately not profitable?
Maybe I'll say something which is not super popular, but we don't believe that more people is necessarily better. Scale creates a lot of complexity as well. And in that sense, we really believe that, and I strongly believe that you should be very cautious as you scale. And it's not a matter of like the ability to scale, it's a matter of like making sure that every person that you have counts, every person that you have changes the company for the best, and making sure that people are holding things that are meaningful. And we talked about it before, because otherwise you won't be able to keep these strong people because they want to do meaningful and impactful things. So my biggest advice is that it's better in my eyes to hire less, make sure that you are super strict on the people that you hire and the people that stays with you. And I think that from a certain point, it creates an effect that it attracts the same people over and over again. And at that point, you can release it a bit and let the organization grow. But I don't think you should do like very fast hiring phases because you just raise some money and so on. I think it's not healthy. And from my experience, like less people but more talented ones is much better. And I think that today we are a very big organization, and we are thinking about what's the healthy mix between developers and product managers and product analysts and product designers and so on and so forth. So the approach or the practical things that we are doing is a bit different, but the essence is still there. We don't want to overhire, and we are not creating situations where you have one thing to do and you have two people that needs to do it. It's the usually it's the other way around.
We've mostly talked today about being in a startup. You became CPTO just after the IPO. So I wonder what are the differences in the product team now that you've gone through that process? You're now a public company. How would your advice be different to somebody in a post-IPO company versus the startup phase we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think it's totally different world in a way. I do feel that things that change once you go public. So again, it's not a single point in time, but I do think that when company is going public, it's a point of reflection. And it's also like something that is like forcing you to think about things like maturity and long term and things that not necessarily are the top of mind when you are small. I do feel that the biggest changes is that, for the product organization, so suddenly you have a lot more things that you need to do as in the product management. So a lot more concerns that you need to address. It can be around, just I'll give a recent example. So next month we have our annual customer conference, and suddenly it's a huge event with thousands of people, and product management should be able to portray the vision to that. So this is something that you are not concerned about when you're in a startup, for instance. So there are a lot more things that you need to handle. There is the public markets, all the things around investor relations and how you work together with investor relations to create, a good picture of what's happening in the product outside. I also feel that product is suddenly a lot more diverse in the skills and in the roles that you have within the organization. So you need suddenly more roles, more expertise in operations, organization for the product, which is something that as a small startup you don't think about. But once you have like dozens of product teams that are working together, suddenly there is a lot of thought and things that you need to build in order for it to build to be effective. I feel that there are also things that doesn't change. You need to make sure that product, as the organization scales, and even as a public company, are still focused on the customers and on bringing them impact. The practice is changing, but not the essence in a way. So I do feel, that like being a public company, for me, like the biggest difference is about the sense of responsibility and the understanding that we have a huge effect on so many people. And we need to treat this with a great sense of responsibility from our side. But again, you need to continue and build practices in order to remain super fast and in order to be able to experiment and in order to make sure that everyone are still connected to the customers and not to internal things that a large company usually generates within. So this is, I think, like sums it up.
And as you get bigger and presumably the product becomes more complex and so does the team, how do you make sure that you're maintaining that sense of control? How do you make sure that you're underwriting product quality from the center? Is there any sort of sense in which control is lost? How do you manage that?
It's a very good question, and it's a huge challenge because so many people are building the product. And I think for us, there are a few key principles. Again, it starts with the people you bring. So it's important to stay that. But also, we spend a lot of time in building context and creating an alignment of like understanding together what are we trying to aim for, what are we trying to solve. So as a big organization, suddenly a huge part of your role as a leader of this organization and in general of leadership in the product is making sure that everyone sees the same picture, that everyone are aligned about the challenges before talking about the solutions, and also create practices around that. And I think another very important point for us, we really love to create points in which we work closely with the teams on the product itself and also getting the feedback directly from the field. So maybe just one example, like we introduced a section within our support section in the product where people can actually contact directly the CEOs if they are frustrated. And we have a like internal group that we see all the feedback. And this is just one example of like getting the feedback straight from the customers. And many times, we take points from there, which are anecdotes, but we understand where we are not aligned, where people see things differently. So I think having these kind of checks that are a direct connection to the customers are super important. So we are like living within the community. We are like constantly meeting customers and so on. And again, I think it's a constant work. It's not something that you solve and then you move forward. You need constantly to invest in it, in all of these things that we've mentioned, bringing the right people, building, the alignment and the context for everyone, giving them all the information they need in order to understand how to solve things in a way that is great. Keep being very connected to the customers and to the product. And of course, we have the advantage. We use the product of ourselves very heavily. Basically, we are very much exposed to everything that we are building. And I think that this also is a great advantage for us.
That is all my questions. Thank you very much. Building Globally was brought to you by Global App Testing. To find out more about how best-in-class functional and UX testing can help your product grow, head to globalapptesting.com. If you enjoyed what you just heard, click follow on the platform you're using right now. Building Globally is available anywhere you get your podcasts.